A shocking proposal in the Middle East, a major meeting in Moscow, and the manhunt for a murder suspect concludes in Tennessee. I'm Elizabeth Vargas, and America's News starts right now.
Tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu proposes a full occupation in Gaza. Will the U.S. intervene to take over food distribution? The ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is here to discuss what happens next. Then the Epstein case heating up as House Republicans issue subpoenas for the Clintons. Is there a smoking gun to uncover, or is this a weapon of mass distraction? And later, a NewsNation exclusive, inside Border Patrol's elite tactical unit that took down the devil in the Ozarks.
But first, this Tuesday night, concerning developments out of Gaza tonight. In short, the chances of a peace deal are sinking, while the chances of the humanitarian crisis getting even worse are rising. This as Israel appears to be on the verge of a full occupation of the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a 3-hour security meeting today with the IDF. He reportedly proposed a complete conquest of the war-ravaged territory, including areas where the surviving Israeli hostages are believed to still being held. The message today from Netanyahu's office was rather cryptic. Quote, the IDF is prepared to carry out any decision made by the security cabinet. Now, given that Middle East politics is often a game of shadows, it could well be that the threat of a complete Gaza takeover is just a pressure tactic to get Hamas back to the negotiating table. If that's the case, the tactic has yielded very little so far. Ceasefire talks with Hamas have collapsed. The militant group is demanding that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza be resolved first before dialogue continues. The State Department notably sidestepped today when asked point blank if the U.S. supports a full takeover of Gaza by Israel.
We are not in the business of interpreting statements from foreign governments when and if they're made. We do remain focused on freeing the hostages, including the remains of 2 Americans, and ensuring that Hamas never rules Gaza again.
Now, even within Israel, support for a full Gaza takeover is lukewarm at best. The Israeli military reportedly opposes it. Sources close to Netanyahu say if military leaders don't like the plan, they should resign. More than 600 former Israeli security chiefs are asking President Trump to pressure Netanyahu to end the war, not expand it. And on the world stage, Israel finds itself more and more isolated by the day. These photos of starving children, these videos of desperate, large crowds, and those reports of the IDF shooting at Palestinians trying to get food have alarmed the world. The IDF claims it only fired warning shots at civilians and that hundreds of people died because someone else shot them. Today, Israel did announce it will now allow local merchants to bring in goods, including baby food, produce, and hygiene supplies. Israel says it will monitor the goods and purchases that are taken in so that they don't benefit Hamas. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee was in Gaza with White House envoy Steve Witkoff just days ago to see the crisis for himself. I spoke to him a short time ago. Ambassador, the local director of the World Food Program in Gaza said, quote, I have worked in some of the harshest places you can imagine. I have never, ever seen this kind of starvation in my whole career. You were just at one of the 4 aid distribution sites. What did you see?
I saw a very different picture. Certainly the GHF mechanism of getting food to people, it's not perfect, but it's working. And it's working because when the president ordered us to stand up a humanitarian program, there were 2 requirements. 1, get food to the people who are hungry, but 2, make sure that it's not in a delivery method that Hamas can steal it. That's been one of the big problems. The food is there, it's not getting in. And when it does get in, even by the UN's own assessment of it, 87% of it is stolen, looted, or taken directly off the trucks in what the UN has euphemistically called self-distribution. So there is a problem. But I do believe that there's an enormous amount of food going in, but Hamas is stealing the largest portion of it and then trying to sell it to the people who are hungry. It's a disaster.
Well, President Trump says there is, quote, real starvation happening in Gaza. Do you see real starvation?
I think there is certainly hunger and deprivation and possibly starvation, particularly in the northern parts of Hamas that are controlled, or the northern parts of Gaza controlled by Hamas. That's where the problem is. I don't understand why so many world leaders and countries are putting all the pressure on Israel, who is pouring tons of food into the system, tons of food into Gaza. But when it's stolen and looted, and then it's put in warehouses by Hamas to be resold, they made over $500 million last year selling stolen food. And what do they do with that? They use it to kill people.
An internal U.S. government assessment says only a very small percentage of that food is being stolen by Hamas. The UN says it is not 87%, as you just cited, but much, much lower. Right now, the food is being distributed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's a group led by a friend of yours. Critics say the setup is unduly chaotic and dangerous. People must walk many miles through military lines to get there. They're being trampled in the rush and the crush of the crowds.
Simply not true. And by the way, that 87% figure I gave, that was from the UNOPS, their own operation that gave that number. I didn't make it up out of thin air. So the UN needs to get together with themselves as to what the real number is. But when I was there last Friday, I saw with my own eyes trucks coming in from the UN food source, and I saw people getting on top of them with rifles, taking over the trucks, stealing the food. So I don't know what they're looking at. They're looking at something different than I saw with my own eyes.
Well, President Trump met last night with Steve Witkoff. They reportedly decided that the United States would now take the lead role in getting food into Gaza. The amount of food may be tons and tons of food, but it is a small fraction of what is needed for 2 million people. Do you know anything about this plan for the U.S. to take the lead or how that might work?
Well, Elizabeth, the U.S. is taking the lead. GHF is a U.S.-operated endeavor. And so when people say the U.S. ought to be doing something, it has been doing something. It served over 106 million meals in 2 months. And despite some reports that say that people are being injured and horribly treated, it's simply not the case. There have been hiccups. There have been difficulties. But the idea that there's mass shootings or that a lot of people are being trampled, it's simply not the case. And most of the information that says that comes from the Gaza Health Ministry.
Well, we're
which is,
looking
of
at
course,
video. We're
Hamas.
looking at, I know, but we're looking at video right now that shows desperate people packed and together trying to get their empty pots filled with food. And hundreds of people have been shot and killed as they've been trying to get to these food and aid distribution sites. The IDF says it's firing warning shots, but the question is, why is the IDF using live ammunition for crowd control?
Well, first of all, when you're seeing pictures of people with pots and pans, that's not the GHF site, because the GHF does not serve ready-made food. They serve food boxes that will feed a family of 5 for 8 to 10 days. So that is a part of either the World Food Kitchen or other methods of delivery. What you just showed was not the GHF model. The reason GHF model is working is because people can come, they can get the box, and they can carry it in their arms and take it home with them. And they have food for 8 to 10 days for a family of 5. It's much harder for Hamas to steal that. And by the way, as far as people being killed, I talked to Gazans last week when I was in Gaza, and what they told me was, yeah, there are people being killed trying to get food, but they're being shot and murdered by Hamas. These are people who are Gazans. This wasn't coming from the IDF. This was not information that I was being given by somebody independent of what's happening. This is from the citizens who live there, who told specifically of their own family members who had been murdered by Hamas trying to get to food.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now pushing for a full occupation of Gaza, even though his own military opposes this. The military fears Hamas will kill the last 20 living hostages. Does the Trump administration support a full occupation of Gaza?
I don't think the Trump administration, as of now, has taken a position on what the next step should be, but the president has been very clear on what he believes should happen, and that is Hamas should demilitarize. They need to lay down their arms. They need to release all of the hostages, not some, all of them. The president's been very clear. Hamas has no future there. They shouldn't have any aspiration that they're going to stay or that they're going to help lead. Otherwise, to let them stay, to let them have any role in the future of Gaza would be like letting the Nazis have a role and a future in Germany after World War II. And I don't think anybody could think that's a good idea.
Ambassador Mike Huckabee joining us from Israel tonight. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, Israel is renowned for its elite spy operations. In fact, Mossad is considered one of the best intelligence agencies in the world. But being good at spying does not make you invulnerable to it. And according to a new report, Israel is now facing an epidemic of espionage from within. Ordinary Israelis spying on their neighbors on behalf of Iran. Dozens of Israelis are already being prosecuted for allegedly spying, and hundreds more are believed to be talking to Iranian agents right now. According to the report, they're driven by greed, sometimes lust even, and are willing even to kill for a quick payday. It has reportedly gotten so bad that Israel's own top-level security agencies are now turning to the public for help. Joining me now is the co-author of that report, journalist Dan Raviv. He's the host of the Mossad Files podcast and co-author of Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars. Dan, great to have you back on the show. All right, this story, I almost couldn't believe it. Israel's a nation of 10 million people, almost all of whom have to serve several years in the IDF defending Israel. Why are these Israeli Jews now agreeing to spy for a country that has vowed to destroy Israel?
Well, there seems to be a morale problem. There are other signs of it. The nation of Israel is tired of the Gaza war, of course. Now, that doesn't security agency Shin Bet. It's so easy for Iranian agents to offer money, often cryptocurrency, that they can easily pay to an Israeli to do a little favor. You know, take a few pictures around the Prime Minister's weekend home or around a military base, and it is believed in intelligence, and at least 60 are being prosecuted, 50 have been put in jail, Elizabeth. The security folks are really surprised and disturbed.
We missed a little part because I think your signal's taking a bit of a hit. I hope it sticks with us now. But this is how it works. Iran apparently is reaching out to people in Israel, Israelis, on Instagram or Facebook or WhatsApp, using fake IDs and offering very lucrative jobs. Then what happens? How do they entice them to, as you said, take pictures of the Prime Minister's weekend house or the perimeter of a military facility?
That's a trend in many Western countries. Greed. It's so easy to make some money doing a favor for an anonymous person, like taking some photos. But at least one Israeli man was then actually transported to Iran. He was on a trip to Turkey, and he heard he could make a lot of money. So he went to Iran and had a great time in a hotel, and the Iranian agents asked him if he would go home and try to assassinate Prime Minister Netanyahu. That was a bit much. He did say he might assassinate someone else, and he, of course, has been jailed. Another man also facing at least 10 years in prison because they didn't yet kill anybody, but the Israelis want to stamp this out somehow.
Shin Bet, which is the equivalent of our FBI, told you that this used to be a problem with people who were on the fringes of Israeli society, those who were disenfranchised or disenchanted in some way, but that this is now moving to mainstream society. What's driving that, and how much of it is this widespread public unhappiness with the war in Gaza and with the current Prime Minister?
Yeah, I do see a connection there, less patriotism. There's also a phenomenon of some reserve soldiers refusing to report for duty because they don't believe in the Gaza war anymore. It's a real problem for Israel, no question about it. It's also likely that the people who are more, shall we say, in the middle of society, who are comfortable in their jobs, for instance, feel this is a way of protesting, even doing Iran a favor. Again, some of this took place even during the 12-day war when Israel and then the U.S. were bombing Iran's nuclear program. Again, Shin Bet, that agency, very concerned, trying to figure it out, and they started a public service advertising campaign telling people it may look like easy money, but there will be harsh punishment if they do.
Yeah, that's a sign of how widespread the concern is in Shin Bet, that they're actually airing these ads warning ordinary Israelis not to get lured in to these traps that are being set by Iran, and that apparently several dozen Israelis, maybe hundreds, are walking into. Dan Raviv, fascinating story. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, turning now to Russia, where the countdown is on. President Vladimir Putin has T-minus 4 days to end the war in Ukraine or face tough sanctions from President Trump. Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will be in Moscow tomorrow to meet with Kremlin leadership. The Kremlin has said Witkoff is always welcome, but it's unclear how seriously Putin is taking President Trump's threats. Just today, dozens of drone strikes in the town of Lozova killed 2 people and injured dozens of others, including 2 children. Meanwhile, President Trump spoke on the phone today with Ukrainian President Zelensky, who thanked him for the, quote, productive talks. The U.S. has also agreed to sell $1 billion worth of weaponry to European allies, weapons that will end up on the front lines in Ukraine, another sign that the White House's make nice approach to Russia is ending. The real question, though, is what the deadline means on the ground for the people in Ukraine. And that's where NewsNation's Robert Sherman is tonight. He's live in Kyiv. Robert, is there any hope there in Kyiv that these threats from President Trump will work, that there will, in fact, be a ceasefire?
Well, there's certainly hope for a lot of people here that one day these sleepless nights will end and the horrors of war will be gone. But when it comes to will things be different this time, a lot of people fear this is all more of the same. It was February of 2022 when President Biden attempted to talk Russian President Vladimir Putin down from going into Ukraine.
We're ready to impose severe sanctions on Russia if it further invades Ukraine.
Days later, the Kremlin rebuffed President Biden and invaded. Fast forward to the 2024 campaign trail, then candidate for President Trump scorned his Democratic rival's inability to prevent an all-out war.
You could have stopped that so easily, Joe. You didn't know what the hell you were doing or saying, Joe.
And vowed under a Trump White House, things will be different.
I will get it solved in rapid order, and it will take me no longer than 1 day.
And yet, over 6 months have come and gone, and the war rages on. Have things changed at all under President Trump compared to President Biden, or is it largely the same?
Honestly, maybe something has changed, but I wouldn't say that we feel it.
Everyone just wants to see some action and not just words.
The feeling among many Ukrainians is while they have liked President Trump's increasingly tough talk towards Russia,
We get a lot of thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth.
bombs are still falling and civilians are still suffering.
It's like living in a lottery. I wish this horror would end soon.
But one thing that has at times been different under this administration, the public rhetoric between Washington and Kyiv.
You don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards.
The heated Oval Office exchange rallying some of President Trump's supporters back in the States, but also reinvigorating the public here.
Ukrainians were really motivated to fight again after this talk because they were really proud of the response of Zelensky.
So as the Kremlin and White House go back and forth ahead of Friday's deadline, and President Trump vows to back Russia down, people here have no idea what to think.
We hear a lot of things from Mr. Trump. If he will be successful, we will be glad to this. If he will be not, we'll be relying on ourselves.
The reality is Ukrainians have been down this road before, and they've watched as economic sanctions have been handed down again and again and again, not making much of a difference to their everyday lives. What they're waiting to see is just how interested is Russia even in making a deal. Elizabeth?
Yeah, so far, practically zero sign of that. Robert Sherman reporting live from Kyiv in Ukraine. Thank you so much. All right, coming up for us on America's fastest growing cable channel, Republicans have officially issued subpoenas to Bill and Hillary Clinton. demanding they testify before a House committee as part of an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Investigative journalist Michael Schellenberger joins me next. And later, the Titan submersible disaster could and should have been prevented. That's according to a new report by the Coast Guard out today, how the company running the trip put profit ahead of safety. Details coming up. There was a time long ago when shaking hands with Jeffrey Epstein might just help your career, whether you were in business or academia or politics. But times change, and today it's very clear that any contact with the dead sex trafficker left a reputational stain that will simply not wash out, especially when your enemies are eager to exploit it. That certainly goes for President Trump, and now it goes for President Bill Clinton, too. Clinton was subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee today. He was asked to testify on Epstein, the late convicted sex offender. Clinton joins Trump in the small group of just 3 former presidents to receive congressional subpoenas since 1900. Harry Truman, if you were wondering, is the 3rd, and no, he did not meet Epstein. Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, was also subpoenaed, as were several former top Justice Department officials. In its letter to the former president, the committee noted Clinton's connections to the notorious Epstein. Clinton did more than shake hands with Epstein at a fundraiser. He has admitted to flying on the wealthy financier's private plane 4 separate times in 2002 and 2003. During one of those trips, he was pictured receiving a massage from one of Epstein's accusers, and Clinton's dalliances with younger women are well documented. President Trump has had his fair share of tawdry affairs as well, and he also was once a friend of Epstein's, who also flew on Epstein's private plane. It is a connection that is still dogging him, especially after the DOJ announced last month that the case was closed on the accused sex trafficker. The move spawned a furious backlash from Trump's own supporters and claims of a White House cover-up. For more on all of this, let's go to NewsNation's Washington correspondent Joe Khalil. Joe, it was a big list of subpoenas that came out today. Now, the Republican leader of the committee, Jim Comer, signed them, but this was a bipartisan act by this committee to ask for these subpoenas, yes?
Yeah, it was. You're absolutely right, Elizabeth. The subpoenas officially went out today now that the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, signed off on them, and they were sent out. But the process that led to this moment was bipartisan. It's especially unusual in these politically divisive times because when it comes to these hot-button issues and really controversial ones, that's typically where you see the partisan divide. And it's hard to think of any more controversial topic right now than Epstein and these Epstein files. But in the vote to actually force the release of all of the Epstein files, it was about 9-2 with Republicans and Democrats joining together in this. And by the way, included in that is also the subpoenas for the Clintons and several other officials from the Obama administration and the Trump administration as well. And those votes also were bipartisan, which means several Democrats voted to subpoena the Clintons. Several Republicans voted against the wishes of the Trump White House to release the files. And you mentioned it was a lot of subpoenas that got a signature and were sent out today. Take a look here at what we're talking about, because it's not just a subpoena to release all of the files. And we already talked about President Clinton and Hillary Clinton, but you've also got several U.S. attorneys general, Merrick Garland, Bill Barr, Jeff Sessions. You've got people like Bob Mueller. You've got James Comey on this list as well, and several others. So it is a comprehensive list. There is actually a cover letter that went out with each one of these. I want to just read part of what James Comer, the chairman, wrote here in the cover letter that actually went to the full Epstein files. He says, while the department undertakes efforts to uncover and publicly disclose additional information related to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's cases, it's imperative Congress's conduct of oversight in the federal government's enforcement of sex trafficking laws, generally and specifically its handling of these investigations here. What they clearly are after, Elizabeth, are all of the files, and it will be interesting to see who complies and who doesn't, whether it be the Clintons or the Department of Justice.
It sure will. All right, Joe Khalil, thanks so much. For more, let's bring in Michael Schellenberger, journalist and founder of Public News. Michael, you've been all over this story. First of all, quickly, do you think the DOJ complies with this subpoena to turn over all of the Epstein files?
I'm highly great to be with you, Elizabeth. I'm highly skeptical that it will do so, just given all the foot dragging that we've seen out of the administration on these files. I mean, what a mess it's been. It's been a complete disaster for the administration. I think really the first big misstep by the administration, misreading its own base, taking for granted its support. I think we've seen evidence that the administration's treatment of the Epstein matter has hurt the administration with its own people. Both in polling data, but also some focus group data show that. So I hope so. I'm not optimistic. And I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is that it's not just a underage sex trafficking scandal. It's also potentially one relating to sex blackmail involving the intelligence community. The former CIA director was at Epstein's place. We've seen involvement of Israeli military, former Israeli president was there, all sorts of links to Israeli intelligence. So part of a broader scandal that is unfolding right now around what our intelligence community is doing and the way it's involving itself into politics.
Yeah, and listen, all sorts of rumors have metastasized in the absence of information and the vacuum in refusing to release all these records. Who knows what's true and what isn't, but there's a lot of speculation going rampant. All right, former President Clinton said he cut off all communication with Epstein more than a decade before Epstein was arrested in 2019. What are they hoping to get from President Clinton?
It's hard to know exactly. And I mean, the issue, I think, as you mentioned there, is the issue of whether or not this is going to sort of backfire on the administration, since it does seem like there was plenty of links to, President Trump that are undisclosed.
Right. If they're going to subpoena President Clinton, doesn't President Trump check all those boxes too?
It seems to me like an obvious risk. I mean, the thing with Clinton that's so disturbing is that photograph of him getting the massage. There's also the painting of Bill Clinton in a blue dress that was in Epstein's apartment. It's really seedy, tawdry sort of stuff. It looks like kind of blackmail material. And we've also had reports the FBI pulled a lot of CDs with photos and videos of it, reports of hidden cameras by one of Epstein's victims. So it, looks like a sex blackmail operation, and that's would hardly be unusual in the history of intelligence community. They borrowed that tactic from the mafia. It's well documented that the FBI and CIA engaged in sex blackmail.
So, and why Hillary Clinton? Why subpoena her?
Well, yeah, I mean, that part I'm not totally sure I understand. I mean, I thought there was maybe some connection here to Russiagate, that they were also trying to get at some of the information about Russiagate. Now it's been framed around Epstein, but Hillary Clinton is at the center of a lot of questions around whether or not the Russiagate conspiracy theory began as a dirty trick by the Clinton campaign that was then sort of embraced by CIA and FBI as a way to undermine the legitimacy of President Trump starting in 2016. I assume those are things that they can ask about when an open hearing like that. They're certainly not limited in what kind of questions they can ask. So maybe I sort of wondered if there was sort of a underlying or a secondary agenda to some of these subpoenas.
Yeah, you bring up Russiagate. Today, we heard news that the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is ordering this grand jury investigation on the 2016 election. You have a big article out on a whistleblower in the intelligence community assessment of Russia's meddling in the election. The intelligence report said that Russia did meddle and that it did so to help Trump. What is the whistleblower saying about that report?
Well, I mean, I think you have to put it in a little bit of context, too, is that there's been the CIA came out with a review of tradecraft, meaning a critique of their own work in doing the intelligence community assessment of Russian interference in 2016. I don't think there's anybody that questions that Russia tried to interfere in the 2016 election. The question is whether or not it was correct to draw the conclusion that they favored Trump at all. There was a lot of evidence, according to multiple sources, as well as a House Intelligence Oversight Committee report that had basically been suppressed and was only recently declassified and released, that suggested the Russians may have favored Hillary because they viewed her as manageable and more stable than President Trump, which certainly seems plausible at the side of it. But also our understanding is just that there was a lot of conflicting intelligence, certainly nothing that warranted drawing the conclusion that he absolutely favored Trump, and then certainly not
well, except that Putin himself said so.
Yes, although that was afterwards, and it was, and by the way, that was some of that's taken out of context. You know, some of it was, when Trump was there, and it wasn't clear that Putin actually heard the question that was being asked, if you look at that footage. So it's pretty murky, and again, a lot of the intelligence was just, not pointing in that direction at all. And in today's report was just that that Brennan really insisted that this debunked and Steele dossier, which suggested that Trump was a victim of a sex blackmail operation in Russia, that it was Brennan himself, the former CIA director, that insisted that it be included in this intelligence community assessment, and that's a huge politicization and partisan tool of the process.
The Steele dossier, which was bogus and highly inflammatory, was included as an addendum, not actually in the body of that report. Lots of conflicting stuff. We have that Senate Intelligence Committee, an exhaustive 2-year-long investigation led by Marco Rubio, which concluded the Russians did interfere and did favor Trump. Important to get to the bottom of it. We'll see what happens with this DOJ investigation. Michael Schellenberger, always great to have you on the show. Come back soon.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Elizabeth.
All right, coming up for us, a NewsNation exclusive. We got access to the elite Border Patrol unit that caught the devil in the Ozarks. Who will they be hunting next? All right, right now there are 2 different manhunts going on right now for accused killers, one in Montana and one in Washington State. Now, sometimes when police hit a dead end, they call in an elite Border Patrol tactical unit for help. That team is known as BORTAC, and it made headlines in June when it captured a dangerous fugitive known as the Devil in the Ozarks. His name is Grant Hardin, and he led police on arguably the most high-profile manhunt of the year. NewsNation's Allie Bradley is here now with exclusive details about the takedown. Allie, what makes this BORTAC team so effective and good at their job?
Yeah, Elizabeth, this elite tactical team, whether it be their stringent signing on process and what they go through to their tactical training at the border, they're being deployed more and more to the interior of our nation, going after some of these fugitives. And we were able to exclusively sit down with the BORTAC commander and the 2 BORTAC operators who actually caught the Devil in the Ozarks. Take a look at how it all unfolded.
They need to find a guy. They know that we can be value added to that operation.
BORTAC, Border Patrol's elite tactical unit, deployed across the U.S. for high-risk operations. After nearly 2 weeks of searching with no success, local law enforcement called on BORTAC to track down a fugitive known as the Devil in the Ozarks, a former police chief convicted of rape and murder who escaped from prison and vanished into the Arkansas wilderness.
It points back to prioritization and looking at what the most imminent threat is, and then flexing those resources there quickly.
Through mud, rain, and rugged terrain.
Let's go. Like, this is what we train for.
BORTAC agents arrived 12 days after the manhunt for Grant Hardin began and pressed forward. Skills sharpened on the southern border, now being used to protect American communities. One agent leaning on his tactical training for tracking a suspected gotaway in hiding. He followed his gut, climbed a ridge, and came face to face with the fugitive.
We decided we're going to go back to the last known spot that the Department of Corrections actually had his sign, and it was roughly a couple hundred yards from the prison. So we started at that location, and we're like, let's see if we can get a direction of travel from him. Without having any real anticipation of walking up on him that day.
Hardin took off running, tripped, and fell down. And just like that, a nearly 2-week hunt was over, just 24 hours after BORTAC arrived on scene.
As soon as I identified myself as a police officer, then that's when he took off in a sprint. I chased him for probably 30 or 40 yards, and then he actually fell down, and then he looked back at me, and he kind of had this moment of like, am I going to run? Am I going to fight?
After that capture, the community can finally breathe again.
And yeah, we were excited as could be to let everyone else know that it was over. We could finally, that whole community could be at ease.
Now, Elizabeth, Commander Voss tells us not a single operation is done by just one person. It is a team effort, and multiple agencies were involved there in that takedown. Now, Voss also tells us the mission's simple. Get in where they're needed, get their people out safely, and get the bad guy. And in this case, this guy thought he could outrun justice, but Bortak got him. Elizabeth?
Well, thank goodness for that. He was armed and very, very dangerous. Allie Bradley, thanks so much. Coming up for us, it's been more than 2 years since 5 people lost their lives as they descended to the bottom of the ocean to see the Titanic. But a new damning report out today describes the shady business practices and ignored safety warnings that led to that disaster. That's next. We are learning new details tonight in a damning report highlighting a host of failures that caused the deadly Titan sub disaster. 5 people were killed when the Titan, a submersible operated by a company called OceanGate, imploded during a dive to the Titanic shipwreck in June of 2023. Sound of what is believed to be the moment the sub imploded was unknowingly caught on tape from the Titan's support ship.
Yeah. It should be about 500 meters, 30. What was that thing?
That was the wife of OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush asking what was that thing after that noise. Coast Guard investigators now say the disaster behind that noise could have been prevented. In a report more than 300 pages long, the Coast Guard outlined 12 factors leading to the implosion, ranging from inadequate design of the sub to poor oversight to a toxic workplace culture at OceanGate. Joining us now is scientist and journalist Michael Gillen. He's been to the Titanic wreckage. He was the first journalist to report from the site 25 years ago. Michael, this report is damning. It says OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush ignored safety warnings, deliberately avoided oversight, and could have faced criminal charges if he had not died in this implosion.
Yeah, you know, sadly, Elizabeth, the name of the company, OceanGate, is also an appropriate way to kind of describe the scandal that was perpetrated by the CEO, Stockton Rush. Now, look, the man paid for it with his life, so I hesitate to speak ill of the dead. But the fact is that he is the villain in this story. He capitalized basically on people's fascination with the Titanic, but he did so in a very dangerous way by overselling the safety of this vessel, by playing footloose and fancy-free with its maintenance. He did everything on the cheap. It was clear from the evidence that the U.S. Coast Guard report just presented that this was a man who was after fame and fortune, and he cared very little. And I say this again with a heavy heart, but he cared very little about the safety of the passengers. But again, he paid for it with his life. There, you know, in 2022, which was a year before the disaster, and I don't want to even call it an accident, because, you know, this was not a whoopsie. This was preventable. This was foreseeable. This was a tragedy. But a year before, in 2022, when they went down, this was like the 12th or 13th dive. When they got down to the Titanic, which is 2.5 miles below the surface, the thrusters misfired, and it was only because of the skill of the pilot that they were able to get back safely. Also in that year, during one of the ascents of the dives, they heard a big bang, and the U.S. Coast Guard says that after that bang, there were microfractures in the pressure vessel, which was made of carbon fibers with titanium. That's a whole nother thing, because when you meld two dissimilar materials like that, carbon fibers and titanium, where they come together, now in retrospect, some of the reports that I've read say that is where the fracture happened, and that's ultimately collapsed.
You know, there is so much evidence in this report of Stockton Rush playing fast and loose with the safety rules. The report points out that the passengers, for example, were classified as mission specialists so that they could get around regulations for small passenger vessels by saying the sub was for research. One of those passengers was 19 years old. He was not a scientist doing research. He was a kid who paid big bucks to go on an adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And after that, exactly. And even before you talk about the maintenance issues and overselling the safety, this is a man who put together a vessel on the cheap. The remote controls that he used could be bought at a sporting goods store, big box store. Everything was done on the cheap. After the 2022 issues, the thing was stored in St. John's, St. John's, Newfoundland, out in the open, exposed. And there was even a report that it was struck by lightning. And he just covered all of that up. But you know what? Last thought on this, Elizabeth.
Quick one.
OSHA and the U.S. Coast Guard also have some culpability in this, because there was a whistleblower who brought some of this to light, submitted the report to OSHA. That whistleblower had a settlement with OceanGate. Okay. OSHA kind of just dropped the ball. So we won't know the full details until we have another report coming up in a couple of months.
Well, I hope to, we'll have you back when that report comes out. Michael Gillen, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're
All
welcome.
right, coming up for us, back to one of our top stories. A House panel subpoenaed the Clintons, both the president and the former First Lady and Secretary of State, with a bunch of other former officials in the Epstein probe. Chris Cuomo will be here next and give us his take on the whole matter. All right, Chris Cuomo joins me now. Chris, we were just talking, the Clintons, both Bill and Hillary, were subpoenaed in that congressional Epstein investigation. We were talking about what's almost as noteworthy as who wasn't subpoenaed. Namely, obviously, President Trump, but also Alex Acosta, the former federal prosecutor who cut the sweetheart deal with Epstein, allowing him to have like weekends off out of his cushy first jail sentence. And
non-prosecution agreement.
Non-prosecution agreement.
Very rare in cases like that.
Stopped the federal investigation to the sex trafficking ring.
And then got a big federal job.
And then got to be labor secretary for President Trump and had to resign because it all exploded, this whole controversy in his face back when.
It's like we're getting punished for wanting transparency. You know, you asked me, what do you want to know? I want to know everything.
Right.
Put it all out. You have access to it. And look, I believe that this is that classic expression of being hoisted on your own petard, that French expression that the bomb that you made is now going to blow you up. Mm-hmm. You know, why aren't we hearing from the two men at the top of the FBI who said they knew there was a client list, that they knew there was a murder? Well, why aren't they testifying? Why isn't the AG being subpoenaed to answer why she said the client list was on her desk? You know, this is...
But Hillary Clinton's going to testify.
You know, honestly, I was saying to you before in the audience, full transparency, I thought when the list of subpoenas came out this morning, it was Russiagate.
Yeah, me too.
Because it seems like a much more likely set of people to want to talk to for that.
Right.
Than this.
Right.
But it's just politics. I actually mapped out at the top of the show with my producer, Ben, all the different moves that led us to this place with Epstein. And it's such an obvious battle of which side is worse on this issue that's going on. And we're, of course, paying the price by the distraction and not getting the transparency.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a great show. So, Chris, take it away. Have a good one.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.